Tonight we have a very special speaker from Los Angeles. I was fortunate enough to be able to listen to him a few times. That's part of what we have to do to put this on. And I was really pleased with the message of Cocaine Anonymous that he carries. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Lee from Los Angeles, California.
My name is Lee, and I'm a grateful cocaine addict. I like to identify as a grateful cocaine addict because when I got sober in 1986 in Cocaine Anonymous, I heard a guy say that from the podium. He identified as being a grateful alcoholic addict. And for the life of me, I couldn't figure out how anybody could be grateful to be a drug addict or an alcoholic. At first, I thought maybe he was grateful because he was a drug addict and he wasn't using. In my first few days of sobriety, I was anything else but grateful to be a drug addict. I didn't want to be a drug addict. It's not like when I was growing up as a little boy, I had aspirations of becoming a drug addict. I wanted to be president or something like that, and I didn't know what happened to me. So after the meeting, I went up to this guy and I said, how can you say you're a grateful addict alcoholic? Are you grateful you're not using today? And he said, no, kid, you don't get it. He said, let me explain it to you. He said, if I wasn't a drug addict and an alcoholic, when I came into these programs and my life didn't depend on me working those 12 steps over and over again, I never would have done it. And the life I've been given through Cocaine Anonymous is so much better than anything I've ever known in my whole life that I am grateful I became a drug addict and alcoholic. Otherwise, I never could have got this thing. And that's exactly how it is for me. I get a little emotional when I think of what this program has done for me. In 1986, like I said, I got sober in Cocaine Anonymous. And by working those 12 steps over and over and over again, listen to what you people in the rooms told me. It's like you people opened up the gates of hell and let me walk out. And somewhere along the line, I don't know exactly where it happened, by continuing to work those 12 steps over and over again, it's like somehow the gates of heaven opened up and let me walk in. I love this program. Everything I got today, everything I am, I owe to this program. And I owe it to Cocaine Anonymous. And I'd especially like to thank the founder of Cocaine Anonymous. And I was lucky enough to get sober in L.A., where there are a lot of guys that were instrumental in starting Cocaine Anonymous up. And one time after a meeting, one of them was speaking, and someone came up to him and said, there's a little bit of controversy. Who actually did start Cocaine Anonymous? And without blinking an eye, without missing a beat, he looked him straight in the eye and he said, God started this thing. He said, we were only some of the privileged messengers that got to help him out. And, this is just such a wonderful experience for me. I'd like to thank the committee for asking me to come up and share what I've learned and experienced in Cocaine Anonymous. I'll go back to the beginning and tell you a little bit how it was for me. When I first started drinking and using, drugs and alcohol weren't my problem, in my opinion. They were my solution, I looked around at life and, I could be in a room full of people like this and feel all alone, I felt that if I was in a room full of people and you people knew what I was thinking and what I'd done and who I was, you'd probably come up and ask me to leave. When I was growing up, I always wanted to be somebody else, someplace else, with someone else, doing something else. I never was satisfied where I was. And drugs and alcohol worked for me at the beginning. I can remember very early going to dances, and I had a little voice that would talk to me. I'd be at a dance, and I'd want to dance, and I'd see the girl across the room I wanted to dance with, and the little voice would say, if you walk over there, Lee, everybody's going to watch you, and you'll probably walk over there and ask her to dance, and she'll look at you and say, no, I don't want to dance with you. And then everyone will start laughing at you. And besides that, even if she said, yeah, you don't know how to dance, everyone will laugh at you if you dance. So that little head, the only way that I could make him be quiet or get over listening to him was to have a few beers or smoke a joint. Then I got up the courage to go across and ask the girls to dance. And it seemed to take the fear away from me. And a couple of beers turned into a pitcher, to a couple of pitchers, and so on and so on. It seems like anything I do that I like, I have to do more and more to get that feeling. You know, I didn't drink because I liked the taste of alcohol. I used to get drunk. I didn't smoke Thai stick or marijuana because I liked the way it smelled. I did it because I wanted to feel differently, and it did it. And the more powerful it was, the better it was. It got me there faster. And the same thing, when I first discovered cocaine, man, it was great. I remember being at a party in the Marina Del Rey, and a friend of mine said, "Come on, Lee," and he waved me and a couple of my friends, and we went into a bathroom, and I thought that was a little odd, and we all went in there, and he got a little nervous. He chopped up this stuff, and I watched some people take a straw and snort it, and I did it, and I really didn't feel anything, but all of a sudden, after we went back out and we continued the party, they said, "Well, it's time to go," and I said, "It can't be." And I noticed 3 or 4 hours had just gone by like that. And I didn't want it to end. I just didn't want it to end. And that began a pattern of me of using cocaine and using more and more cocaine and more and more and more cocaine. And it went from the weekends to the weekdays to when I'd be going to work in the morning. Instead of making a left to work, my head would say, "The dealer's 5 minutes to the right. You can score, grab a little, be 10, 15 minutes late to the office, use all day, get a lot of work done." And make that right. Then when I showed up at the office like an hour late, you know, I knew that wasn't such a good idea, but I was just kind of like powerless over it. I mean, I knew it wasn't what I wanted to do, but I just couldn't say no, you know. I started using more and more. I started getting the nosebleeds. I was married at the time. I had a wife, 2 kids, house on the hill, business, car, all the elements of success. But I still had that problem with, if you people knew who I was, you were going to take it all away because I didn't deserve it. And the cocaine allowed me to power through my day. And but my wife, my first wife, didn't like that. So out of respect for her, I would try not to use at home, which meant I would come home later and later and later. And she would get madder and madder and madder, you know. And she would accuse me of being out with other women. And it wasn't about being out with other women. Most of the time I was at my office, locked in the office, doing lines. You know, one time I told her, I said, "You know, if you keep accusing me of that, I'm going to go out and do it." And sure enough, I found that when you got a lot of cocaine, there are women that will really listen to your whole story. And be very sympathetic and seem to understand you. You know. Needless to say, that marriage did not last. I used so much cocaine that I was told by a doctor that if I didn't quit or cut down, that I... Yeah, that's right. I opted for trying to cut down. You know, I always had the best of intentions. The problem was the world kept judging me by my actions, you know? And that's what happened. I have the best intentions, come home late. I just couldn't do it. I was just a mess, and then a friend of mine said, "You know, Lee, I can help you if you want to stop snorting it." He says, "What we'll do is I'll show you how to cook it up and smoke it out of a pipe." They called it freebase. They called it freebase in those days. They didn't have crack when I came into Cocaine Anonymous. And I'm very glad they changed the name because nothing about that disease is free, you know. They should have called it family base or car base or home base, you know. It cost me all those things. They all left, you know. I used for 16 years. I used cocaine for the last 10. I freebased for the last 6. And for the last 4, I tried desperately to quit, and I couldn't. My usage went more and more and more, you know. My wife kept calling me a drug addict, and I kept denying it. And, you know, I spent so much time lying to her that I wasn't using and that I didn't have a problem with it, that what I ended up doing was bullshitting myself, you know. And when it was all gone, when she filed for divorce and took the house and took the kids and I'd lost everything and it was just me and the cocaine left, I remember looking in the mirror one day, a year before I got into Cocaine Anonymous, and said, "Damn, man, you are an addict. You can't quit." And I didn't know about Cocaine Anonymous at the time, and all that meant to me was that for the next year I just used like an addict, you know. I remember being at a party and there was a pile of cocaine and they were passing it around and they were taking a little and doing lines. I just took the straw, put it in the pile and snorted until I felt the boom in the back of my head, because that's what I wanted. I wanted the rush. That was it. Someone said, "Geez, you could die. You could kill yourself like doing it that way." I said, "So what?" And that's the way it was for me. I didn't quit because I was afraid of dying. You know, if anything, I was afraid of living. If I would have died, it would have been just as well. Oh, well. You know, I wasn't going to do it to myself on purpose, but I just kept waiting for it to happen, in fact, and it never did. Never did. I remember I loved Cocaine Anonymous because it just gave me a different way of thinking and looking at the world. You know, I learned that my way of growing up, that little voice that would talk to me, I was feeding myself with false information my whole life. You know, when I came in, and thank God for sponsors, my sponsor told me, he said, "Lee, you got to get out of the results business. Your results suck." That your results got you, look where it got you. It got you into Cocaine Anonymous. And I said, "No, it didn't. It got me into the hospital. They had to bus me to Cocaine Anonymous." You know? And I loved it when we used to go to meetings. When at first they'd take us into meetings and we'd say, "Are there any other addicts, alcoholics present?" Everybody'd put up their hand. And when I put up my hand, I had that little plastic wristband with my name on it that they give you at the hospital, you know. And I noticed there were other people in the meeting, though, that would raise their hand. They had watches and rings and jewelry, all things I had pawned or sold to get my drugs. And after the meeting, they would get into cars and drive off into the night. They didn't have to get back in the van and go back to the hospital like me. And I wanted what they had, you know. I wanted what they had. I didn't want what I had anymore. I mean, at the end, I remember being locked up. Well, not locked up. I remember being in my house. I mean, being in the house that I was renting. Well, actually, being in the house I was supposed to be renting. You're low on money, you got the rent. Are you going to score or pay the rent? You know, what? I was months behind. I had all the curtains closed, pinned together so that no one could see in. Because towards the end, when I got it, I was going to do it until I was out. That's the only way I could stop at the end. There was no more putting some away, doing too much, going on. Because when I got it, I was going to make it and smoke it until I was done, period. And I remember hitting that pipe at like 3, 4 in the morning, and a little torch going, and thinking to myself, "Damn, is that a crack in that curtain?" Boy, if there's a crack there and someone's outside and they see this torch, they're going to know I'm in here doing something. And if it's the cops, they're going to come in and bust me and take my stuff. And if it's robbers, they're going to come in and steal my stuff. Now, a sane person would have put the torch out and gone to bed. Not if you're a drug addict like me. I put the torch down, all right, temporarily, and went outside my house to look inside and see if I could see inside. I didn't have any problem with the insanity of this disease when I got here, you know. It's like if there's cops out there, bad guys, and you go outside, what's going to happen to you, right? I'm an idiot. Then I'd go back in the house, and I'd be hitting the pipe again, and I'd say, well, you know, if I get inside the closet and close the doors, then even if there's a crack in the curtain, they won't be able to see in the doors in the closet. So I'd go in the closet and finish up. It was just total insanity. Just total insanity. I remember my first wife, her father owned a nude bar in North Hollywood. And there are guys that hung around those nude bars that would do anything to get in good with the owner because he hired all the women. And there's this one guy by the name of Big John. And Big John's claim to fame, he was like a tree trunk. He could not stand up here without stooping over. He could carry a 40-inch television down 3 flights of stairs all alone. And I remember one day my wife at that time, she said, you know, if you don't stop it, Big John's going to get a couple of friends and they're going to come over and knock some sense into you. And the way I looked at that, the first thing I wondered is, why would Big John need a couple of friends to beat me up? Seemed like overkill to me. And the next thing I knew that they were going to come for me because I knew that I couldn't quit. So it wasn't like I had any even choice in the matter. So the only thing that I could think to do was to start carrying a .357 Magnum with a 6-inch barrel, which is, you know, helped alleviate some of the fear of the Bush people. Most of you, I see, know what the Bush people are. Yeah. For those of you who don't, that's when you're in your house, you're hitting that pipe, you're getting high, and all of a sudden you hear a voice outside saying, all right, let's go rush them. You know. Put your hands out and come out. And you peek out the curtain, open the curtain, peek out the window, and you can't see anybody, but you can hear them. They're probably in the bushes. That's why we call them the Bush people. If you get brave enough to fling open the door and run out of the house with your gun to get them, then they become the tree people or the roof people. You know, they're out there. You can still hear them, you just can never see them. Man, when I came into Cocaine Anonymous, I had lost everything. I'd lost the house, lost the wife, lost the business. But most of all, what really tore me up was I had a little 7- and 9-year-old, little boy and little girl, and that when they looked at me with the disgust and hatred in their eyes, see, I lost them, but they looked at me, they just hated me. And I couldn't blame them because I hated myself, what I do to them. You know, when you're using, you might intend to be at that birthday party on time, but when you show up an hour, 2, 3 hours late, if at all, it's not the same. Even if you're there, you're not there for them, you know. You rationalize things. You think to yourself, you know, they're not using that money in the piggy bank. I could use that and score today and replace it. I'll give it to them when they're older, you know. Teach them how to invest wisely, you know. And so I lost absolutely everything when I came into this deal. And I remember my first wife had said, you know, if you will only admit that you're a cocaine addict and get help, then everything will be all right. I'll let you see the kids. And I remember calling her from the hospital, saying, well, I've checked myself in. I am a cocaine addict. I do have a problem, and I'm going to get help. And I remember her saying, you bastard, you're not seeing these kids anymore. And that tore me up. And thank God for sponsors, because I remember, you know, we're taught when my sponsor told me when I came in, he said, Lee, anytime you're angry, anytime you have any problems, you're afraid of anything, you know, you can call me up and we'll work through it. It's because of one of your character defects. All you have to do is figure out which one of your character defects it is, ask God to remove it, and you'll be restored to sanity. And if you can't figure out what it is, you call me up and I'll help you. Consequently, I had to call him, I think, every day for at least the first year of my sobriety, because there was always something going on with me, and I tried, but I couldn't figure it out. And I remember making a phone call and relating what my first wife had done to me, how unfair I thought it was, and I remember the voice on the other end of the line saying, that's good, now you have more time to work the steps. There was nothing I could do. There was nothing I could do. It was absolutely right. When I came in here, it was easy to make this program my #1 priority, because that's what they told me to do. Because the truth of the matter was I had absolutely nothing else. You know, I went to meetings. I was told, my sponsor told me, he said, you know, Can you stay sober just one day at a time? And I said, I don't think so. He said, well, do you think you can stay sober an hour at a time? I said, I don't think so. He said, do you think you can do it for 10 minutes? I said, I think, yeah, maybe I could do 10 minutes. He said, that's good, Lee. You work this program 10 minutes at a time. And incidentally, that means that during those 10 minutes, you do not call your dealer to see if he'll be home in 20 minutes. I needed help working this program. You know, I was told that the first 3 steps are about honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness, and that's how the program works, HOW. I was taught that to lie is to die. And see, my whole life, when I got here, lying was not something that I did to be an evil person. It's just something I did. See, I'm a people pleaser. I want everyone in this room to like me. And before I got here, I'd be willing to say anything to get you to like me. If you people are all San Antonio basketball fans, I would tell you how lucky the Lakers were. It was just a fluke that they're beating San Antonio. And I hated those Lakers. They were belligerent and arrogant, and they didn't deserve to win the championship. On the other hand, if someone told me you're all Laker fans, I'd tell you they're the best team that's ever been in basketball. You know? Oh, man. So see, it was like I would say anything to get people to like me. And what that meant was the people that did like me, my mind would say, that little voice would say, they don't really like you. They don't know who you are. And it was absolutely true. See, I was dooming myself to failure, you know. When I came in here, I knew my way didn't work. I thought that was one of the promises, that I could get out of the results business. My whole life I was worried about the results, worried about what you people thought of me, worried about the job, would I have enough money, worried about this, how I was going to get that. And when I was told that I could get out of the results business and just concentrate on taking the steps, and that if I did that, the results would take care of themselves, I thought that was great. And that's exactly what I did. I learned for all the little tips you gave me, like, you know, be in a service, you have a better chance of making it. So I went on a mission for service commitments. I was told that I didn't have to believe anything, that I didn't have to think anything. In fact, I was taught that thinking was a liability. They said, Lee, you can't think your way into right acting, you got to act your way into right thinking. In my early sobriety, I'll give you an example of this. My sponsor told me, he said, what I want you to do, Lee, is every day when you wake up, I want you to get on your knees and say, God, I'm a drug addict and an alcoholic. I can't manage my own life. I was told that you could and would if you were saw it, and I would ask that you please get me through the day clean and sober. And then he said, if you make it, hit your knees before you go to bed at night and say, God, I'm a drug addict and alcoholic, and I can't manage my own life. Thank you for getting me through the day clean and sober. And that's what I started doing. I used to cheat a little at night. I'd say, you know, and if you really are out there, God, if you can do the same thing again tomorrow, I'd be deeply appreciated. It's a day-at-a-time program. I knew I was in the future, but I couldn't help it. I guess in my first year of sobriety, I had a friend, and when I came here, I got to tell you, I did not believe in God. I remember when my sponsor took me through the second step, he asked me, he said, Lee, do you believe in God? And I couldn't tell him that because I knew he believed in God, and this was a guy who had offered to save my life, in my opinion. So I did the next best thing. I said, I believe that God doesn't like me very much. Look how he screwed up my life. He said, that's a start. Good. We'll go on to step 3. He said, it's about being open-minded and never saying never. So I had a friend of mine in my first 6 months or year of sobriety. He said, Lee, he says, doesn't it bother you getting down on your knees and praying to some God you don't even believe exists? And I told him, I said, you know what, really, I don't get down on my knees for God. I get down on my knees for my sponsor. He told me to do it. That was the absolute truth. And then I thought about it for a while. I said, you know, and if you really want me to think about it, it's not about me getting down on my knees. This is about me trying to get up off my ass. Being on my knees is an up position when you used to being flat out in the gutter, you know? And it reminds me that I'm begging for help, that I need it, that I couldn't do it. 4 years I tried to quit, couldn't do it, couldn't quit. Had everything stripped from me. And when I prayed that, I used to say it out loud. And the reason I used to say it out loud is because I remember what I'd be thinking while I was praying that was, I wonder if anybody can hear this. But see, it really didn't matter. If there wasn't a God, it didn't matter. If there was a God, it was a good thing. My old way of doing things, if I didn't believe in God, I wouldn't have prayed. Therefore, if there wasn't a God, it didn't matter. But if there was a God, I was messing myself up, wasn't I? So see, this is a win-win program in Cocaine Anonymous, at least to me. It gives you actions to take that will save your life. You know, within my first year of sobriety, I was with some friends and we were going to go and play golf. And they were sober on the program. And for those of you who don't know, golf is like a 4 or 5 hour deal, a game. And we went over to this guy's house, brand new condo. He pulled up in a brand new Cadillac. And he came in and we were all going to go out and play golf. And the guy said, wait a minute. And he reached up on the top shelf of his bookcase and he took down a tin. And he sat down. I was standing right next to him. When he opened the top of that tin, I could smell the chocolate. And I knew that was Thai stick, my favorite form of marijuana. And he proceeded to roll 3 or 4 joints. And that little voice in my head went off. He's doing it. Why can't I? New condo, new car. He's doing it. Why can't I? And then out of nowhere, I heard another voice say, because you're a drug addict and alcoholic. And the obsession left me like that. And then I heard my friend tell me the reason he was in that condo was he had just been kicked out of his house by his wife. And that Cadillac was a result of his Porsche being repoed. He went down slower than I did. And then I noticed something different because I noticed that when he rolled those 3 or 4 or 5 joints, he put the lid back on the tin, put the lid back in the tin, put the lid on the tin, and put it back up on the shelf and said, let's go. See, I might have rolled 3 or 4 joints, but after a 4 or 5 hour activity, I would have taken the rest of the lid with me because that wasn't going to last 3 or 4 guys. You know, not 3 or 4 joints, not for 4 or 5 hours, not the way I used. And anyway, what I'm trying to share with you was taking the action of getting on my knees and not trying to debate whether there was or was a God saved my life that day, in my opinion. Now, I don't know if God told me I was a drug addict or an alcoholic, or if it's just the fact that for over 6 months I had repeated that to myself twice a day out loud in my room. I don't care. It saved my life. And that's what the actions that if you take that Cocaine Anonymous will teach you to do will do for you, in my opinion. In my opinion. That first step about honesty was very hard for me because I wanted people to like me, and I remember thinking to myself, all right, if you people really want to know what I'm thinking, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you. It's very hard for me, but I told you. And you people told me, oh, I felt like that. Oh, we know someone that did that. Keep coming back. And it was the first time in my life sharing my deepest secrets and my feelings with people. They told me to keep coming back. Because at the end of my using, no one was telling me to keep coming back. They're telling me to go away, get the hell out of there. You know, if you come back, we'll call the police and have you taken away. And so I like Cocaine Anonymous right from the very beginning. You know, I remember, and it was very hard. It's progress, not perfection. I remember being in a restaurant with my kids after a couple of years because I had got not custody, I had gotten visitation where I got to see them occasionally. And I was with my new girlfriend and we're sitting at a restaurant and the check came. And back in those days, $20 was a lot of money to me. I'd been unemployed for 2 or 3 years, couldn't get a job, and still didn't have a job, I believe, at that time. And the waiter came and brought our check after we had eaten, and I looked at the check, and there was a $20 mistake in my favor. Now, in the old days, what that meant was nice meal and a $20 bonus, you know. But it was like my sponsor was right there, you know, saying, you lie, you die, you lie, you die. So, you know, if it's a question between $20 and me going back to hitting the crack pipe, I called the waiter. I said, excuse me, sir, I think you made a mistake in this check. And he said, we don't make mistakes here. It's all computerized. Your check is perfect. There's nothing wrong with that. But I knew I hadn't told him the mistake was in my favor. And I knew I had to say that before I could leave with his $20. So I told him, I said, well, okay, it's a great meal, but I think you cheated yourself out of $20. And he said, here, let me see that check. He said, oh my gosh, you're right. Thank you very much. So I gave him the extra money. Feeling a little weird, not really liking it, but not really having a choice, because those were the rules of Cocaine Anonymous as they were explained to me. You know, rigorous honesty. And he came back, gave me the money, and we're about to leave, and I felt a little tug on my sleeve, and it was my son Brennan. I said, yes? And he said, Daddy, why did you do that? And I really didn't want to turn to him and say, you know, Brennan, because I don't want to go back to being a scumbag drug addict hitting the crack pipe. That was why I did it, but I did, it's progress, not perfection. I did the next best thing I could. I said, well, I knew how much the meal was. We ordered the meal. We ate the meal. We paid for the meal. That's the only honest thing to do is pay for it. He said, okay. Now, fast forward the clock ahead 12 years. Now that son is working at a delicatessen in the San Fernando Valley, and he comes home one night. He's now living with me because my first wife couldn't handle him, so he's now living with me, and he had some problems, but through the grace of God in this program, he's beginning to be straightened out. He's working. And he comes home one night and he said, Dad, you'll never guess what happened. The funniest thing happened today at work. He said, you know, when we get real busy, someone will give us a check and we'll make change out of our tips, and then we'll ring it up later when we're serving tables. And he said, and I did this to this one table, and it was a $20 bill, and I made change. And then at the end of the night, I had forgotten to ring it up, but they'd already closed out the cash register, and I didn't know how to put it back in. You know, I wasn't just going to throw a $20 bill in the cash register. So I went to the manager, and I told him what happened. And the manager looked at me, and he said, Brendan, why would you tell me that? There's no way anyone would have known that. And he said, Dad, that was just weird. I told him, I said, well, that's the only honest thing to do. That's the way I was raised. And I want to thank Cocaine Anonymous for that, because if I had raised that boy my way, he not only would have probably taken all the money out of the register, probably would have taken the whole damn register. So what this program gives you, I'm trying to share with you, is so much more than just not drinking or using. When I came in, my sponsor said, Lee, what is it you want? I said, two things. One, I don't want to hit the pipe and drink and use anymore. And two, when I'm not doing it, I don't want to think about doing it. Because that's what I did. If I was using, I quit a lot of times, but that little voice would start going off. You can do just a little. Look, those people are doing it. Why can't you? Those people are doing it. Why can't you? And I'd always start again. And I wanted it to leave me. And my sponsor said, Lee, it's not just about not drinking or using. You can't drink or use, or this thing doesn't work at all. But if you don't drink and use and you work those 12 steps over and over again, he said, I'll show you how to be happier than you've ever been in your whole life. Because the bottom line is, if I can't show you how to be happier, you're going to go drink and use, because that's why you were doing it in the first place. He said, this is about being happy, joyous, and free. And I said, yeah, just show me how not to use for today, you know. But God bless you, Artie. I love you more than anything in the whole world, because that's what he did for me and his wife, Sharon. They're very special to me. And I was a tough case to handle when I came in. Woo. I hear stories that when I came in, I was more calm because I wasn't using anything. I thought I was calmed and slowed down. I hear people share that knew me when I came in. They said, man, you were a little Tasmanian devil. You were a buzzsaw, you know. They used to hide the coffee from me. They'd lie to me and say, that's not decaffeinated coffee, that's regular. And they give me decaffeinated coffee. They didn't want to wind me up. I mean, I remember I would get depressed about something, and like I'd call up my sponsor, and his wife would tell me, she'd say, make a gratitude list. And one time I remember Artie, I was having a problem. He said, make a gratitude list. I go, what's that? He said, get a piece of paper and a pencil and write down things you're grateful for. Start at the top and don't stop until you get to the bottom. And I was a tough case. I looked at him, I said, you know, I don't have anything to be grateful for. I've lost everything. And he made me sit down, and he stood right by me. He said, write one. And I wrote one. He said, are those new tennis shoes you have on? I said, no, they're 4 or 5 months old. He said, write one, fairly new pair of tennis shoes. He said, write two. He said, do you have a color TV? I said, no, I don't. He said, "Do you have a color TV you can watch?" I said, "My mother lets me watch hers." He said, "Write down 2, a T-color TV I can watch." So I got the idea. So I went down using my imagination. I got all the way to the bottom. And you know what? Funny thing happened. Couldn't remember what I was so depressed or worried about. His gratitude list really worked. And then he had to tell me, he said, "Now don't go back and think what you're having problems with." That would have been my way. Gee, the bad thoughts left me. I wonder what I was so depressed about. I said, "Don't do that." He taught me how to get into service. You know, he's the one that told me if you get into service, you have a better chance of making it. And I remember my first commitment was a coffee commitment. And I think I kept that commitment for 8-9 months. You know, I made coffee, and I would worry about the coffee and the cookies. And I remember first time I made coffee, they used to introduce people after the meeting or thank them and say, and so-and-so made coffee, and everyone else got a hand. My first time, they said, "And Lee made the coffee," and everybody went, "Boo." I said, "What happened?" After the meeting, the guys came over to me and said, "Lee, how did you make that coffee?" I said, "Just what you told me to. I took the can, I put it in the top of the 40-ounce pot." They said, "Okay, what size can did you get? Did you get the little can?" I said, "No, the big ones were on sale, the 5-gallon. He said, "Tomorrow I'll get the small can." That's you. There was one newcomer that really liked it. He goes, "That's great coffee. It's like espresso." Woo. But what I'm trying to share is about progress. You people told me, you said, "Lee, you can fall flat on your face. We will pick you up, dust you off, and say, look, try it this way." And all my life, see, I'd always been afraid to try anything because if I tried and failed, I didn't want you people to laugh at me. And I learned at a very early age, if I didn't try, then I couldn't fail. And that doomed me to a lot of failure, much bigger than the small tasks I would try to accomplish. And so in this program, you taught me to try things and not to be afraid and turn it over to a higher power. You know, I've just had so many wonderful experiences in Cocaine Anonymous. And I got to tell you something else too. You know, I'm sober. I'm in my 15th year of sobriety, and it's impossible. Thank you very much for that applause, and it's to God in this program because it's not me. In 16 years, I couldn't get more than 2 days. And for me to be in my 15th year, all that means to me is, and that's a big deal to me, but evidently it's not a big deal to God because I ask Him every day and He does it for me, every single day. Almost 15 years He's done it. So my higher power has really got the power, and I give it all to Him. Everything I am today, everything I got today is a direct result of this program. This program is my number one priority, and it still is today. And you know, by being in this program, working the program, being the service, I've got so much back in my life today. My second wife, and the one I think God chose for me because I made such a terrible mistake on the first one, I think God said, "We're picking this one for Lee. You get out of the way," you know. She's just, you know, I'm in here in the Big Apple. She's the apple of my eye. She's the most wonderful person I've ever met. And I give another tip, another compliment to my sponsor. In my first year of sobriety, I heard people say, "Don't get in a relationship in your first year." Now, I had drank and used with Terry for about 6 years. And this program was more important to me than anything. And I remember going to my sponsor and saying, "Well, I've been going with her so long, there's only 2 things to do. Either break up with her or get married to her. And I'm going to break up with her." And he said, "Lee, other than you drinking and using, that would probably be the biggest mistake you could ever make." I love you for that, too. He said, "In your first year, just don't make any changes at all. Just concentrate on not drinking and using." Did the best I could. I married her in my first year. So it's progress, not perfection. And she's been very good to me, too, because in the service from my coffee commitment, I had a chance in my first 6 months to be a secretary of a meeting in Cocaine Anonymous, or a GSR. I opted for the GSR commitment because that was a 1-year. Secretary was 6 months. And my head said that after you people elect me to anything and see the kind of job I do, you will never elect me again. So I took the year commitment. That's the one I wanted. You know, at least I'll be around maybe for a year, maybe. And it just kept going for me. The commitments for me, she's been so patient with me because it's taken a lot of time. I've been lucky in Cocaine Anonymous. I remember, I'll tell you another quick little funny story. My first GSO meeting, I went to the meeting, and this is back in the mid-'80s when Cocaine Anonymous was real young, and I didn't know that. When I got sober, AACA is the same to me size-wise, I thought. And I went to my first CA GSO meeting, and the World Service Conference was coming up, and they said, now, if there's anybody that has ideas for Cocaine Anonymous, let us know. We'll take them to the conference. My hand went up. Hey, you know, I had 7 months. I had ideas. I said, you know, denial is a killer in this program. We all deny that we're addicts and alcoholics, and I noticed that 3/4 of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous contains stories so we can relate. Why don't we have, like, just a collection of stories about cocaine addicts? You know, I don't want to change the first 164 pages of the big book, but maybe we ought to have some stories. And what I heard her say to me was no, and what she meant was, we were a young fellowship at that time. We didn't have the money. Nice idea, wait a few years. But the minute she said no, my hearing closed down and my mouth opened again to make my point, because I thought it was a pretty good idea. Make a long story short, my first GSO meeting, I get into a shouting match with the chair of the San Fernando Valley GSO. And it was not pretty. I was not pretty. And the next morning, I called my sponsor and I said, you know, I told him what I did. I said, I know, and I hate the amends step, but I knew what he was going to say. I said, I know I have to call her and make an amends, but I don't even remember her name. I certainly don't know her number. I should have gotten that, but I don't know. And Artie said, he's on the phone. He said, wait a minute, Lee. He said, Sharon, what's Helene's number? His wife sponsored the chair of the GSO at the time. Right? And I guess she had called that night. She had a more advanced program than me. I had to chew on it all night before I could tell him the next morning. And today, Helene is one of my nearest and dearest friends. I love her so much. And the amends step, that brings me to the amends step. I mean, I hate the amends step. I hate calling people. I had to do that a lot in my first few years of sobriety. I'd call him my sponsor, tell him what happened. He'd say, well, call him back and apologize. And I'd say, what for? I wasn't wrong. He was wrong. He'd say, well, it sounds like that, but what did you tell him to do? Where did you tell him to go? What did you tell him that should be done to him? He said, you call and apologize for that type of language. And that caused me to, I remember a year later, I was with a guy and I was having an argument. It was supposed to be a discussion, but it had gone from discussion to argument as usual. And I was 100% right, he was 100% wrong. We were nose to nose. And I thought to myself, this guy is such an idiot. I'm not calling him tomorrow to apologize. I just refuse. So right in the middle of mid-argument, I said, you know what? I got to apologize to you. I'm coming off the wall. I'm using inappropriate language. I have no business talking to you like this. I don't know what's come over me. I'm sorry. Notice I never said I was wrong, because he was wrong, I was right. But I cut it off, and now on my mind, I'm out of here. I take one step to go away. He says, wait a minute. Now I don't care anymore. I'm gone. I can get away from this guy. He said, I think I see what you're trying to say. And I don't say anything. I'm just looking at him. And he runs down my whole argument, and then at the very end he says, you know what? I think you're right. That's another miracle of this program. See, I never would have won. I wasn't even trying to win that argument. The only reason that argument didn't ensue is because of the 10th step. I hate making amends. So I changed my behavior so I won't have to make as many. Still have to make some, but it's just the way it goes. And this program, I guess what I'm trying to say, has changed my life. My actions today, when I first came in, I had to use the group as my higher power. Like I told you, I really wasn't convinced there was a God. And I'd be in situations outside of the rooms, and when I got sober, and Cocaine Anonymous, long-term sobriety was, 6 months, 9 months. Geez, if you had a year, you were a guru. But the old-timers, everybody'd share in a participation meeting, say what was going on, and the old-timers, they'd sit around, they'd call on them at the end, and they'd say, well, no offense, but I sponsor a number of guys in the room, and I just want to tell you, this guy's full of shit. You do that, you'll probably die. He'd probably go out next week. This guy's got the right idea, but he should have done this or that. So I used to pattern my behavior so that when I shared about it the next day in the room, I would get acceptance. And I can't tell you how many things I did belligerently, doing them, thinking to myself, being right in a situation, saying, oh man, this is not going to work. But I trained myself that it'd be better to eat it outside the room and then go back. And I always wanted to go back, do what the old-timers told me, and go back the next day and say, you know what, your way doesn't work. But it never happened. It always worked so well that I was just amazed. I remember, I'll give you one more example. I was at a meeting of Cocaine Anonymous, and this girl walked in, and she'd been around, I'd been around for almost a year, and I saw her walk in, and I was already in the meeting, sitting down, I saw her walk in the door, and I looked at her to make eye contact, and then I was going to smile, and she didn't smile. She just looked me in the eyes, turned, and walked to the side. And I was snubbed. And as I was sitting on the table, I could hear the old-timers say, well, you got to get up and go over there and say hi to her. And I didn't want to do that. But as I was getting off the table, walking across the room, I just knew I had to do it. So I went up to her, back was turned to me, and I said, hi, Rose, how you doing? And I remember as she turned around, her eyes lit up, great big smile broke out on her face. She threw her arms around me, we hugged, and she goes, hi, Lee, how are you? And it was so different than my perception when she walked in the room that I had to share with her how I felt. And what she told me was, Lee, when I walked in the room, I looked at you, and when you didn't smile at me, I felt shunned, and I turned and walked away. So see, this program has so much to offer. It has so much to offer. You just got to do it. Don't question it. Don't think about it. Don't think whether the steps will work for you. If you want to think about anything, think why they work so well, why they're so important. It's not a question whether this program works. It's only a question whether you'll work it. The normies don't get this. I've done a lot of work in H&I too. I got panels, and one of the reasons I love Cocaine Anonymous, there's a lot of opportunity to be in service. When I came in Alcoholics Anonymous, if you wanted to get your own panel and go into hospitals and institutions, you had to know someone or someone had to die. You go to a Cocaine Anonymous H&I panel meeting, they have an open panel, they'd say, Lee, do you want a panel? I already have two. Well, good, you got three. This is on a Friday. You only got Monday and Sunday, And I got a lot of opportunities to be of service. And by doing H&I, we share with each other. What normies don't have, well, we're fortunate, we share with each other on a gut level normal people don't do. I don't know anybody that walk next door to their neighbor and knock on the door and say, can I tell you something? I'm really frustrated with my boss. I wanted to slash his tires, but I only poured sugar in his gas tank. What do you think I ought to do? Doesn't happen. We help each other, so the bond we have, the relationship here, this is better than any family I've ever had. The special feelings I have for so many people in this room are just overwhelming to me. And normal people don't get it. I used to mess with them after I had a few years. People, normies would say, Lee, you go to those Cocaine Anonymous meetings and, you haven't drank or used in, like 3 years, 4 years. Why do you keep going to meetings? I'd say, well, you see, I don't drink or use anymore. They say, we know you don't drink or use. We want to know why you keep going to meetings. I'd say, well, you see, I don't drink or use anymore. See, they can't make the connection. I don't drink or use because I go to meetings, I work the steps, I work with others, I have panels. And I've seen a number of people that come in and get this thing and their lives get pretty good. And then they stop going to meetings, they cut down on their service and they end up going out. Or the ones that don't, they come back after a year or two and they're like rageaholics, And for me, I had someone ask me that the other day. They said, Lee, you're doing as much service now as you did when you first came in. I said, this thing has been working very good for me for 14 years. I'm not going to mess with it. I like what I've been getting. I had a commitment with Cocaine Anonymous, one of the black belt commitments. It took 42 days a year out of my life. Thank you, Terry, for letting me do it. But my opinion, someone asked me, they said, 42 days a year? Man, that's a lot of time. And I said, 323. They said, what's that? I said, you take 42 from 365 and you get 323. I give God 42 days, he gives me 323 days. Who's getting the short end of that deal? Who's getting the short end of that deal? Today, my children call me, my daughter's 25, she teaches high school down in Torrance. She calls me and tells me how proud she is of me, of all the things I've accomplished. And you know what? I haven't done a thing. I let God take care of it. God's done a wonderful job. Everything I got, everything I own is a result of this program. I now have a business and a profession that I shouldn't have. I don't have time to go into that, but a lot of you know my story, and that's a stone cold miracle right there. But what really is important to me is when my kids call me, and when they have problems, they come to me. They wouldn't come to me for anything in the old days. I've got a little 13-year-old son that's never seen me loaded. I remember when he was 8, I wanted to buy him a Christmas present. And I didn't, being a drug addict and alcoholic, I'm kind of a perfectionist. I didn't want to make a mistake and buy him the wrong toy. They got Gundam Warriors and Batman and Superman. So I thought I'd take the steps and ask him who his hero was of the month, so I could get him the appropriate toy. And I'll never forget this as long as I live. I looked down at him, and I named him Lee after me, like a good alcoholic addict. I said, Lee, who's your hero? And without a beat, he looked up, looked me right in the eyes. He said, why, you are, Daddy. I would have died for that when I was out there using. I'd have died for that. This program has given me so much. It's, so much, it's given me everything. It's not so much that Cocaine Anonymous gave me my life back, because I had trouble with my life when I first came in. It's that Cocaine Anonymous has given me a life worth living. It's given me a life beyond my wildest expectations. It's given me more friends than I ever thought possible. When I got my book, my 12 and 12 out, and my big book, and I used to read it, and my sponsor would have me underline and write things in the margins. There's so many lessons here. I found a prayer written by a guy that had just over a year's worth of sobriety. I want to share it with you because I just found it. This was written at the end of the 12th step. It says, may I develop the joy of good living God grants me on a daily basis by seeking His will, working it, and reveling in His results. With the right attitude and action, I can let go and let God make me happy. Thanks, God. Love, Lee. November 6, 1987. If you're new, I'd just like to tell you that not to quit 5 minutes before the miracle. God don't wear no watch. He works very slowly, but that's only because he's very old. And I'll leave you with this. My very favorite saying I heard when I first came in was that the elevator to sobriety is out of order. You got to take the steps. Thanks for letting me share. I love you.